Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, the celebration of life.
Hi from me, Jared Epstein, and welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. Get comfortable and prepare for another bumper week where we upscale our communication skills. We go to Hillbrow for a live street performance, and we learn about the remarkable relationship between Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah.
Welcome back. So last time we talked about communication, how we as human beings have a unique need of communication. And we're going to delve into the Torah, divine wisdom, our instruction manual for life. And we'd like to get some tips and ideas from the Torah. I want to share with you an interesting midrash. The midrash is a Talmudic era explanation of the Torah. And the midrash uses a lot of interesting parable to describe certain ideas. So here's one. There was once a king, and this king unfortunately fell ill. And the doctor prescribed lioness milk in order for the king to recover. How's the king going to obtain lioness milk? Anyone who was asked said, "Not me, I ain't doing that." But there was one man who said, "Leave it for me, Your Honor. I will go into the lion's den and I will get the milk from the lioness. All I need from you, Your Honor, is 10 goats. The king duly supplied the 10 goats, and this man slowly befriended the lions, serving one goat at a time until the lions trusted him. And one day, out of the lion's den he comes with a full flask of lioness milk. On his way back to the palace to give this and present it to the king, all of a sudden, a little fight breaks out. In his own body, his feet say, "We get the credit. If not for us, you would have never made it to the lion's den." And the hands say, "No, we are the ones who get the credit for this great feat because we're the ones who fed the goats to the lioness." And each one was arguing why they deserve the credit until the tongue spoke up. And the tongue says, "But if it wasn't for me speaking up, you would never have expressed this idea to the king. I get the credit." With all the arguing going on, all the other limbs and organs said to the tongue, "Excuse us, with all due respect. You're a little tiny organ stuck dark inside the mouth, between the palates and the teeth. No one even knows of your existence. You don't get the credit." Tongue says, "Oh yeah, we'll see." And so as they approach the king, he quickly presents the milk and says, "Your Honor, here I have brought to you the milk of a dog." Of a dog? The king was enraged, angered. "You brought me dog's milk? What audacity you have! Hang this man tomorrow on the gallows." And so his execution was ordered. On the way to the execution, all the limbs and organs were begging the tongue, "Please get us out of this trouble." And the tongue said, "Ooh, if you now concede that I am the most powerful, watch what I'll do." And as they're about to hang this man, they asked him if he had any final requests. And of course he turned to the king and said, "Your Honor, I'm sorry, but in the Hebrew language, the word for a lioness is kalba, which is very similar to the word kelev, which means dog. Excuse my misconstruing the words, but I meant to say kalba, not kelev. That means I brought you milk from a lioness, not from the dog. And if you want, you could even try it and taste it, and you'll see for yourself." Indeed, the king tried the milk and was cured. And this little midrashic tale, this little metaphor illustrates to us how powerful and important communication is. And so let's look at one tip from the Torah. You know, the Medrash tells us something fascinating. In fact, it's in the Talmud. What is a fetus doing for 9 months of gestation? Is studying the Torah. And then at birth, just before the fetus emerges into a fully grown baby, there's a little nip, a little touch that the baby receives from the malach, from an angel, with which it forgets the entire Torah. Now the Talmud asks a very simple question. If the baby is studying Torah and is meant to remember it, we could say on a side note, something you studied once, when you revisit it again, it's not like you're learning something for the first time, but rather it's a revision. It is a review. But why that little touch on the cleft right here? And the answer that Kabbalah gives is because the cleft, which is in our lip, right by our mouth, is to distinguish the human being from animals and angels. Animals, although they possess a soul, are more body-oriented, as we discussed on last segment. Angels, on the other hand, are more soul-oriented, and therefore both, although they could communicate, cannot speak. The human being is a conglomeration, a synthesis of body and soul, and it's through speech that our body expresses and reveals, as we mentioned last time, communication is revelation. It is through speech that our body reveals our soul. And so our soul is communicated, is revealed through communication, through our bodily expression of the mouth. There's one more important thing, is that communication is also concealing. We have lots of ideas in our mind, and we don't just blabber it all out, or else we'll be giving you a headache. When God created the world, which was a revelation of God's creative energy, it was also a concealment. God didn't express all of God's creative energy. When God spoke the words of the Torah, although that's God's will and wisdom expressed in written word, it's not all that God knows. There's more, of course, to God's wisdom. And so when we speak, communication is on the one hand revelation, on the other hand it is concealment. When we communicate, we have to know what to say and also what not to say. We need to speak because communication is two ways, but we also need to listen. And you may play Scrabble with the word listen. You'll notice the word listen also spells silent, which means when you're going to talk to me, I must be silent and be actively listening to what you have to tell me. Because if I'm thinking of my response to you, or if I'm thinking of something else, then we're not communicating. It might be a monologue, I'm just talking. But in order for communication to happen, I talk, I reveal. Not everything is revealed, but there's also the listening, which is a very important part of communication. Next time, we'll talk more, some other good tips and tricks for your communication based on the wisdom and ideas from the Torah.
Founder of the Parade of One project, Jeremy Danneman engages international communities with a unique blend of performance in public spaces. Bringing people together through music, the Temple Israel Heritage Foundation recently hosted Jeremy, Rwandan Sophie Nzayisenga, and a group of musicians for a live street performance in Hillbrow.
Every year, Rwanda is in the news a lot in April when they commemorate the anniversary of the genocide against the Tutsi. And this year it was the 15th anniversary, so it was in the news a lot. So I had been reading about it in general. I had read a whole book about this topic by the journalist Philip Gorovich. And I was very interested in it because my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I was interested to know people of my generation in the world who had experienced similar conditions. So I then decided on kind of a whim to go to Rwanda and give street performances there to commemorate the anniversary of the genocide. I started fundraising to pay for my trip, and in a couple months I was over there. I went to a place called Kimiranko Market to play on the street for the first time. And I started taking out my saxophone, and the minute I opened this bag with a saxophone in it, people started gathering around. They didn't even wait to see what was going on. Something was already going on because there was a foreigner taking a golden instrument out of a bag. And as I started playing, more and more people gathered around with like little kids practically standing underneath me. And I realized that if I stopped playing, they were going to ask questions and I was going to have to explain myself. So I just kept playing as long as I could. I wasn't sure if I was ready for the explanation part. And then finally, I was getting tired and I had to stop playing, and sure enough, they said, they clapped very nice and then said, "What are you doing?" And someone translated for me that I was from America and I was playing saxophone on the street there to commemorate the genocide. And people were very receptive to this message. There was a round of applause and everything. And as I continued to do this around the country, I always got a very positive reception.
Jenoside nubwo yarangiye, ariko hari ibikomere byinshi yasigiye abanyarwanda, ababuze ababo, ababuze abavandimwe, ababuze ababyeyi, ababuze inshuti, ariko nanone tukumva tudakwiye guheranwa n'agahinda ngo twumve dukwiye guhera muri bya bintu bibi, tukumva dukwiriye noneho kuva muri bwa buzima bubi twabayemo bwa jenoside, duharanira kwiyubaka no kubaka igihugu no kwiteza imbere kugira ngo ayo mateka mabi yabaye mu gihugu cyacu.
I met Sophie on this trip to Rwanda in 2009. I had heard about this instrument inanga before. On the None Such Explorer series, there's a CD called The Music of Burundi, where there's one track of inanga music, which I had fallen in love with. So when I got to Rwanda, I told people I need to meet an inanga player. And people introduced me to Sophie, and we played a concert at the Goethe Institute in Kigali. And that's what sparked my collaboration with Sophie. The inanga, you will see, is a long wooden board, and it has one string wrapped around it at least 10 times. And it's pitched somewhere between a guitar and a bass. It's a pretty low pitch, actually. And interestingly enough, Sophie is not only one of the best inanga players, but she's the only female who plays it professionally. I played with her a little in Rwanda, and I wanted to play more with her. So I started working on getting her to America so that she could record with my bands there. And then a little after that, she came to America, where she worked with both my project and another project called the Nile Project. And it was at this time in 2015, now 6 years after I initially met her, that we recorded our album Honey Wine with my band in New York. Riva Foreman is the director of the Temple Israel Heritage Center in Hillbrow. And this is a very, very old synagogue, a historic building. And it used to be a very Jewish neighborhood, now a little bit less so. So she wants it to be not just a synagogue, but something that reaches out to the community in general in that neighborhood. So we're kind of teaming up with the immigrant associations in that neighborhood to do some street performance outside of the synagogue to reach out to the community there, which unfortunately has experienced some xenophobic violence in recent years against immigrants.
Temple Israel Heritage Center has a very specific role to the 21st century. I believe that the scourge of the 21st century is hatred of the other in all its forms, religious, ethnicity, culture, you name it. And all around you, you can see that horrible phenomenon. In South Africa, xenophobia. In the world, there's Islamophobia, there's anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism. All of these hatreds we have to stop and prevent the next death. So I hope that with God's help, we can make Temple Israel Heritage Center a center where all organizations working in human rights, in human dignity, will come together for exceptional events.
Ntabwo nizeye neza niba numvise ikibazo cyawe yenda turaziretinga zamfasha, ariko icyo numvisemo cyo umuziki kuri njyewe cyangwa se ku bandi bantu umuziki uhuza abantu umuziki ni umuti umuziki ni umuganga umuziki ubasha kuvura umuziki kuri njyewe ku rwanjye ruhande ubasha kumpuza n'abaturanyi ubasha kumpuza n'inshuti ubasha kumpuza n'abandi bantu ndetse n'abo hakurya y'igihugu cyacu mu yandi mahanga umuziki urarema muri makeya.
I think it'll give people a shared experience, and it'll give people something to talk about and something that makes them stop for a second during their day and just stand together and see this together. So it will be, an activity that brings the neighborhood together.
In the Jewish idiom it says, if you save one life, you save the whole world. And I just trust that people of Hillbrow know that there are people very much with many different NGOs, we're not the only one, who really care about Hillbrow, the inner city, and particularly the immigrants amongst us, who I know can contribute not only with music as we see today, but in every sphere of our economy and help build this great country.
The book of Ruth begins and ends with stories about women's relationships. The story of Ruth's persistent loyalty to Naomi becomes a paradigm for conversion to Judaism. In turn, Naomi's attitude of tolerance and acceptance towards Orpah is a model of diversity within friendship. Adel Kozilski elaborates further.
The story of Ruth and Naomi, the veritable mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, perhaps the only mother-in-law and daughter-in-law in history that got along so famously, is an emotional one. It's a heart-tugging one. How did the story happen? There once was a man called Elimelech who was married to a lady called Naomi. They were well-to-do in the land of Israel, but they hit upon hard times, a famine. And Elimelech decides to take his wife Naomi and their two sons, Machlon and Kilion, and cross into the Transjordan, across the Jordan River, into the fields of Moab, where the Moabites lived. Perhaps there, their luck would change. When they arrived there, Machlon and Kilion, their sons, were handsome men, good-looking guys, and they attracted the attention of two of the Moabite princesses, Ruth and Orpah. They were the daughters of King Eglon, king of Moab. They converted. Ruth married Machlon and Orpah married Kilion. But fate gave them a severe blow. Elimelech dies, and 10 years later, Machlon and Kilion, the two sons, pass away. We are now left in the situation where we have Naomi, righteous mother-in-law to Ruth and Orpah, are left alone. Naomi makes the decision to return back to her homeland. She says to her two daughter-in-laws, "You are princesses here. Go back home. Go back to your people, for I have nothing to give to you." The Bible teaches that Ruth and Orpah accompanied Naomi on her way home. But 40 steps later, Orpah kisses her mother-in-law tearfully and says goodbye and returns back. And Ruth turns to her mother-in-law Naomi and says, "I am not leaving you. Where you go, I go. Where you lodge, I lodge. Where you will die, I will die. I am cleaving to you, and I will be with you until death." And so Ruth and Naomi make their way back to the land of Israel. It's very interesting to work out what happened to Ruth and what happened to Orpah. The story of Ruth is more well known than the story of Orpah. When they go back to Israel, Naomi and Ruth are poor. They have to go and pick the produce from the corners of the fields of rich people in order to survive. One such field belonged to Boaz. Boaz, interestingly, was actually a nephew of Naomi. He was the son of Elimelech's brother. And by a whole construed situation, Ruth marries Boaz. And from that union, we have Oved. And that gave birth to Yishai. And that then gave birth to David. King David, king of Israel. So Ruth landed up having a lineage that was of royalty of King David, and from whom we know that now, today, we await the Messiah who will be a descendant from King David. What happened to her sister Orpah, who turned her back on Naomi and went back to her people? Well, we are told that in fact she gave birth to 4 sons, 4 mighty warriors. For our purposes, we know one of them very well. He was in fact the giant Goliath. And history has an interesting twist to it, because much later we have the story of David and Goliath, that famous story of that weak young man, that shepherd confronting the huge Philistine Goliath. And David had the courage to stand up to him, and with one swoop of his sling, one stone, he felled Goliath and killed him. This is a story about mothers and about the decisions that mothers took. Naomi in Hebrew comes from the word noam, pleasantness. This mother-in-law, Naomi, was a woman of integrity, of morality. She clung to God. And when she moved back to the land of Israel, Ruth understood the depth of her mother's commitment, understood how to live a life of integrity, and she chose to cleave to her. Orpah, on the other hand, straddled 2 worlds. While she appreciated her mother-in-law, and she cried genuine tears and accompanied her a certain way, she couldn't pull herself away from the world of Moab, which was the world of excitement. So when it comes to us, really at the end of the day, we're all Naomis. We all have a godliness within us. There are times that we're like an Orpah, where we straddle another world that is so enticing. We want to embrace the world of materialism, of fame, of money, of being in the highlight. But what do we give our generations moving forward? Do we embrace that world and then create giants that just come out in fear and in anger and in selfishness and in wanting the world to owe them? Or do we take the path of the Ruth inside of us, where we understand deeply what our connection to God is, to the world of morality, to the world of integrity? And do we live a more humble life, where we understand what's really, really important and give birth to a David that stands then as a true warrior in Israel? Which world do you choose?
Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of Simcha. I haven't heard from you for a while. Jump onto Facebook, search for Spirit Sister Productions, which you should have already liked, and send us an inbox message or write on our wall. From me, Jared Epstein, and the Simcha team, remember, good communication builds healthy relationships.